You know, when you look at a flower, have you ever stopped to think about the incredible secret drama that's unfolding inside? It's a wild story of survival, a dangerous journey, and a biological event that's completely unique. So today, let's pull back the petals and take a look at this hidden world. Right, so here's the big puzzle. A plant is literally stuck in the ground. It can't move. So how on earth does it manage the incredibly complex task of reproduction that ends up creating something like an apple or an orange? That's the question we're going to unpack. Okay, so like any good story, this one has its main characters. To really get what's going on, we first need to go inside the flower and meet the cast of characters that make this whole thing possible. All right, first up, you've got the male part, the androecium. See that bit on the end of the stalk? That's the anther. You can think of it as the factory where our story's hero, the pollen, gets made. Then, on the other side, you have the female part, the gynoecium, also known as the pistil. This is the destination. The stigma at the very top is like a sticky landing pad, and way down deep inside is the ovary, which holds the precious ovules. Now, before our little pollen grain can even think about starting its journey, both sides need to get ready. This isn't just a simple handoff, it's a really sophisticated process of preparing to create the next generation. So inside that anther, the factory floor is buzzing. Specialized cells divide through meiosis, and they form these little 4-cell clusters called microspore tetrads. Then these clusters break apart, the cells mature, and voila! They become the individual pollen grains, each one a tiny capsule engineered for a mission. And each pollen grain is basically a miniature spaceship. I'm serious. The outer shell, the exene, is made of this stuff called sporopollenin, which is one of the most resistant organic materials known to science. It's incredibly tough. Inside, you've got the vegetative cell, which is like the engine room and the pantry. It's packed with food. And then there's the generative cell. That's the precious cargo, the genetic material for the next generation. Meanwhile, over in the ovary, a parallel drama is playing out. A single mother's cell also divides to produce 4 cells. But here, the stakes are way higher. It's a bit ruthless, actually. 3 of them just degenerate, basically sacrificing themselves so that one single megaspore gets all the resources to develop into the ultimate prize, the embryo sac. And this embryo sac is meticulously organized. It's a really clever structure with 7 cells but 8 nuclei. Up at one end is the egg cell, and it's flanked by 2 synergid cells. These synergids act like air traffic control. They have a special structure called the filiform apparatus that sends out chemical signals to guide the incoming pollen. Then, right in the middle, you have a big central cell with 2 polar nuclei just hanging out. Keep those 2 in mind. They're going to be really important later. Okay, so the stage is set. The players are ready. Now begins the most perilous part of the story, the great pollen journey. The pollen has to leave the safety of the anther and somehow travel all the way to the stigma. This journey has a name, of course, pollination. It's simply the act of moving pollen from the male part to the female part. It sounds really straightforward, but how plants manage to pull this off is where the real ingenuity of nature just shines. So plants have 3 main strategies here. There's autogamy, which is just self-pollination within the very same flower, easy peasy. Then you have gate-enogamy, which is pollinating a different flower but on the same plant. Genetically, it's pretty much the same as self-pollination. But then there's xenogamy. This is the real goal for genetic diversity, cross-pollination between 2 completely different plants. But how does the pollen travel? It doesn't have wings. Well, plants hire matchmakers. Some rely on non-living or abiotic agents like wind and water. That's just a numbers game, really. But a lot of plants rely on living or biotic agents. They use colorful petals, sweet nectar, and amazing smells to attract animals like bees, birds, and bats to do all the work for them. And because cross-pollination is so good for genetic health, plants have evolved these clever tricks to avoid pollinating themselves. Some will make it so their male and female parts mature at different times. Others position them in different places. And some have this amazing chemical security system that can actually recognize and reject its own pollen. So let's say our little pollen grain has survived the journey. It's landed on a compatible stigma. But the quest isn't over yet. Now we get to the climax of our story. An event so unique and so efficient, it's the secret to the success of all flowering plants. The pollen has arrived, and now a chemical conversation begins between the pollen grain and the pistil. This is the moment of truth. First, the pistil acts like a gatekeeper, chemically checking the pollen's ID. If it's the right kind, it gets the green light.
The pollen grain then grows a long tube down through the style, burrowing its way towards the ovule, guided by those chemical signals we talked about. Finally, it arrives and releases its cargo, 2 male gametes.
And this is where it gets amazing. It's called double fertilization because, unlike in most other organisms, flowering plants do a 2-for-1 deal. Both of those male gametes that were just delivered have a critical job to do. This is the brilliant 2-step process. The first male gamete fuses with the egg cell, that's called symgamy, and this creates the zygote, which is the future plant embryo. Then, the second male gamete travels to that large central cell and fuses with the 2 polar nuclei that were waiting there. This triple fusion creates the endosperm, a nutrient-rich tissue to feed the embryo. So one fusion makes the baby, and the other packs its lunchbox. It's genius. With fertilization complete, the flower's main job is done. The petals wither, and the entire structure now transforms. This is the resolution of our story, the creation of the seed and the fruit. And this just shows how efficient plants are. Before the embryo even starts to grow, the plant first focuses on developing that endosperm. It stocks the pantry before the baby starts to develop. A perfect example of this is a coconut. The coconut water you drink? That is literally free nuclear endosperm, a liquid food supply. Once the food supply is established, that single-celled zygote begins to divide, transforming through these distinct stages, from a proembryo to a globular shape, then a heart shape, until finally it becomes a mature embryo. A perfect little miniature plant tucked inside the seed, just waiting for its chance at life. As the seed develops, the ovary surrounding it swells up and ripens into the fruit. Now, when the fruit comes only from the ovary, we call it a true fruit, like a mango. But sometimes other floral parts get in on the act, like the base of the flower called the thalamus. When that happens, you get what botanists call a false fruit, and you've definitely eaten them, like an apple or a strawberry. So, from a simple blossom to a ripe fruit, it's a journey of incredible biological engineering. This silent, intricate dance powers so much of our world. It really makes you wonder, what other secret dramas are playing out all around us, completely unnoticed?